Did the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation intentionally suppress explosive, previously vetted files concerning the Jeffrey Epstein investigation a mere 48 hours after engaging in a clandestine, late-night telephone conversation with the personal legal defense team of President Donald Trump? This is not a theoretical exercise, nor is it a speculative conspiracy theory spun for the sake of political entertainment. It is a terrifyingly real question anchored to a rigidly documented timeline. I urge you to pay close attention to the meticulous sequence of events laid out by Senator John Kennedy during a monumental congressional hearing, because what he unveiled before the American public was a sequence of indisputable facts that Director Kash Patel found utterly impossible to justify, rationalize, or explain away. The stage for this historic confrontation was set within the solemn, wood-paneled walls of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room on the afternoon of the 13th of February 2026. For the initial hour and a half, the proceedings adhered to the painfully predictable, overwhelmingly tedious rhythms of standard bureaucratic oversight. Lawmakers from the Republican side of the aisle utilized their allotted time to inquire about mundane logistical issues, probing the FBI's regional field office staffing levels and budgetary allocations. Conversely, Democratic members of the committee pressed the Bureau for status updates on various investigations related to the events of January 6th. Throughout this grueling 90-minute preamble, FBI Director Kash Patel performed flawlessly in his role as a seasoned bureaucrat. He delivered highly polished, meticulously calibrated, and thoroughly unrevealing answers that successfully committed his vast agency to absolutely nothing of substance. Patel radiated an aura of unshakable confidence. Attired in a sharp, immaculately tailored Navy suit, adorned with a patriotic American flag lapel pin, he sat securely at the witness table. He was structurally insulated, flanked on either side by two top-tier senior FBI aides, while three high-powered legal advisors sat rigidly in the row directly behind him. Patel was a veteran of the Washington crucible. He had previously survived intensely hostile interviews with adversarial media outlets, navigated the treacherous waters of highly contentious Senate confirmation hearings, and endured well over 100 similar congressional oversight sessions since assuming the directorship of the nation's premier law enforcement agency. He possessed an acute understanding of how to project an image of total composure under intense pressure. He was a master of the bureaucratic pivot, knowing exactly how to deflect challenging inquiries by enthusiastically expressing a broad, philosophical support for the abstract concept of governmental transparency, while simultaneously explaining why specific, requested datasets could never be legally disclosed to the voting public. At one juncture, roughly 70 minutes into the hearing, Patel even casually glanced down at his wristwatch, a microscopic but immensely telling gesture of a man who firmly believed he had already weathered the worst of the political storm. However, the entire atmospheric pressure of the Grand Chamber underwent an immediate, palpable transformation. The very second Senator John Kennedy leaned forward and pulled his microphone closer. To fully grasp the magnitude of what transpired next, one must understand the unique methodology of John Kennedy. He is the antithesis of the modern, grandstanding politician who relies on viral outrage to secure cable news coverage. Behind his famously disarming Louisiana drawl and his seemingly relaxed, folksy demeanor lies the ruthlessly analytical mind of an Oxford University Rhodes Scholar and a highly accomplished graduate of Yale Law School. Kennedy operates with the cold, calculating precision of an apex prosecutor. He does not engage in theatrical shouting matches. He does not routinely interrupt hostile witnesses. Instead, he exercises extreme patience. He watches. He listens. He deliberately allows a witness to settle into a false sense of security, lulling them into complacency before methodically dismantling their entire defensive perimeter with a single, thoroughly researched, heavily documented trap. On that particular Thursday, Kennedy arrived at the committee hearing armed with nothing more than a simple blue folder and a printed communications log that Kash Patel would soon find entirely indefensible. "Director Patel," Kennedy began, his voice projecting a calm, conversational tone, "I want to talk to you about Jeffrey Epstein." The shift in the room's energy was instantaneous. It was not characterized by dramatic gasps or sudden commotion from the assembled press corps, but rather by a heavy, suffocating silence. The name Jeffrey Epstein is not a matter of routine budget allocations or procedural trivia. It stands as the ultimate, horrifying symbol of shielded elites, indefinitely sealed investigative files, and a sprawling international criminal enterprise that somehow evaded true, comprehensive accountability. It represents a gaping wound in the public's trust of the American justice system. Kennedy bypassed all procedural pleasantries and struck directly at the core data. He demanded to know the exact mathematical volume of documents related to the Epstein investigation currently held within the FBI's vast vaults. Patel immediately retreated behind a predictable wall of bureaucratic deflection. He argued that the multi-year investigation possessed a colossal footprint, spanning numerous field offices, involving countless witnesses, and generating a massive stream of evidentiary data, making a precise quantification nearly impossible without a comprehensive audit of their internal mainframes. Kennedy swiftly and mercilessly severed this lifeline. "I did not ask for an essay, Director. I asked for a number." When Patel nervously glanced over his left shoulder toward his lead counsel, who offered an expressionless void, in return he was forced to admit that he could not provide an accurate figure on the spot. Kennedy then seized absolute control of the narrative, highlighting the profound absurdity that the director of the FBI could not even roughly estimate the volume of the most controversial investigative file of the century. Setting the initial snare, Kennedy provided the missing mathematical context himself. He cited a formal Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, request that had been officially filed 6 months prior, which definitively established that the FBI was aggressively withholding a staggering cache of approximately 2,300 unique documents directly related to the Epstein network. Following an agonizing 5 seconds of total silence, an eternity in the realm of sworn congressional testimony, Patel begrudgingly conceded that Kennedy's figure fell within the general range of the materials currently undergoing internal review. With the total volume established, Kennedy tightened the logical noose. He demanded to know exactly how many of those 2,300 documents had actually been released to the public. Patel attempted to stall by reciting a litany of standard agency protocols regarding redaction procedures, privacy protections, and the complex legal balancing act between transparency and ongoing investigative equities. Kennedy refused to indulge the filibuster, interrupting the director to demand the raw data point. Visibly shifting in his large leather chair, Patel was forced to confess the dismal reality. A mere 90 documents had been released, and even those were heavily redacted. Kennedy allowed the devastating mathematics to hang heavily in the silent chamber. 90 documents out of a total collection of 2,300. That equates to roughly 4% of the entire investigative file. With a chillingly level voice, Kennedy posed the ultimate question: what exactly was hiding in the remaining 96% that the American electorate was strictly forbidden from seeing? When Patel attempted to resurrect the tired standard justifications of safeguarding sensitive intelligence, protecting national security, and maintaining the privacy interests of uncharged individuals, Kennedy systematically obliterated every single defensive pillar. He clinically reminded the director that Jeffrey Epstein was deceased. He noted that Ghislaine Maxwell was already serving a multi-decade sentence in federal prison. He pointed out that the primary law enforcement investigation had officially concluded years ago. He demanded to know whose exact interests these ancillary matters were truly protecting. It was at this precise moment that Kennedy opened his blue folder and produced the first piece of devastating documentary evidence. He held aloft an internal FBI memorandum, distinctly dated February 8th, exactly 2 months after Patel had assumed the mantle of director. Reading the stark bureaucratic language directly into the permanent congressional record, Kennedy revealed a shocking internal directive. Materials previously cleared for potential FOIA release have been redesignated as law enforcement sensitive and removed from the release queue. Kennedy locked his gaze onto the witness, a stare possessing the unyielding weight of an impending verdict. He leaned closer to his microphone, his voice dropping as he meticulously clarified the exact, unassailable scope of the bureaucratic maneuver that had just been exposed. Exactly 47 individual documents had been completely, painstakingly processed. Kennedy painted a vivid picture of the grueling administrative journey these specific files had already endured. They had survived the unforgiving scrutiny of seasoned career FBI special agents who dedicated their lives to law enforcement. They had been rigorously vetted by specialized classification experts, whose mandate was to safeguard delicate secrets. Furthermore, they had been legally cleared, without reservation, by Department of Justice attorneys. After this exhaustive gauntlet of institutional review, these files were deemed entirely safe, meticulously redacted of protected information, and declared legally appropriate for immediate public consumption. Yet, In a jarring twist, immediately after Kash Patel took command of the Bureau, these exact 47 documents were suddenly, inexplicably, and aggressively ripped away from the public release queue. Without substantive justification, they were shoved back into the impenetrable shadows. Why? Kennedy asked. The single, monosyllabic inquiry hung over the polished wooden expanse of the witness table like a suspended anvil, heavy with accusation. The silence that followed was thick. Patel, recognizing the perilous optics, desperately attempted to frame this sudden suppression of evidence as a completely benign, routine administrative procedure. He cleared his throat, adjusting his posture to project authority, and began utilizing a dense shield of hollow bureaucratic jargon. He spoke rapidly of evolving internal methodologies, referencing comprehensively updated risk assessments purportedly executed by his front office. But Kennedy, a seasoned political veteran and trained legal mind, was entirely immune to the hypnotic cadence of Washington doublespeak. He saw straight through the obfuscation. Kennedy pivoted sharply, cutting through Patel's filibuster with surgical precision. He abandoned internal procedures and went directly for external variables, asking point-blank if anyone external to the FBI had applied pressure to forcefully reclassify those specific files. When Patel offered a slick, non-committal dodge about standard interagency coordination, Kennedy aggressively escalated the inquiry. He systematically narrowed the perimeter, asking if the White House had intervened. Patel deflected again. Finally, Kennedy struck the exposed nerve center of the entire issue. Did anyone from Donald Trump's legal team contact you about those files? At the invocation of that specific name, Patel's facial features visibly tightened. To the untrained eye, it might have been imperceptible, but to those scrutinizing his every move, it was glaring. A microscopic, instantaneous recalibration of his legal and political exposure occurred in real time beneath the harsh committee lighting. He delivered a painstakingly constructed, heavily lawyered non-answer. He claimed, with practiced solemnity, that his ultimate classification decisions were predicated solely upon urgent national security interests and vital law enforcement imperatives, completely free from any external political coercion. It was a broad, philosophical declaration of professional integrity, but crucially, as Kennedy recognized, it was neither a confirmation nor a factual, on-the-record denial that such a highly compromising communication had actually occurred. It was at this precise juncture that Kennedy executed a maneuver rarely seen in the rigid, deeply traditional formality of a Senate Judiciary hearing. He physically altered the dynamic of the room by standing up from his large leather chair. Towering over his desk, projecting an imposing figure of unyielding oversight, he brandished a single printed sheet of paper in his right hand. He held it up high, ensuring the high-definition television cameras captured its physical existence. It was an official, subpoenaed telephone log, distinctly dated February 23rd at exactly 10:47 p.m. Still standing, Kennedy stated for the permanent congressional record that this irrefutable document logged a call placed directly from Director Patel's own personal cellular device to Kasowitz Benson Torres, a highly prominent, deeply connected New York law firm. When Kennedy calmly asked if the director knew the identity of that firm's most famous, high-profile client, Patel's voice grew remarkably tight. He attempted to feign professional ignorance, falling back on the excuse of a dizzying schedule. He claimed he spoke to a vast multitude of attorneys across the country and would need to consult his personal records to accurately recall the specific context of that singular, late-night call. Kennedy violently shattered that flimsy deflection, stating unequivocally for the entire world to hear that the firm actively represented Donald Trump and that the official log proved Patel had engaged in a direct, unmonitored conversation with someone at that defense firm for exactly 17 minutes. Having dropped the evidentiary bombshell, Kennedy slowly retook his seat, deliberately placing the devastating phone log flat onto the polished wood before him. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers, and laid out the chronological sequence with terrifying, undeniable clarity. 3 weeks into Patel's tenure as the new FBI director, exactly 2 days before the 47 previously cleared, Epstein documents were abruptly, inexplicably reclassified and hidden away from the American public. A 17-minute late-night back-channel phone call with the former president's personal legal defense team, the timeline was mathematically perfect. Leaning aggressively toward his microphone, his eyes never leaving Patel, Kennedy asked the ultimate, inescapable question. Did anyone connected to Donald Trump ask you to bury the Epstein files? The ensuing silence that descended upon the vast, ornate Senate chamber was not merely an absence of sound, it was an absolute, suffocating, and paralyzing entity all its own. It was the heavy, visceral, deeply uncomfortable silence of an incredibly powerful man who suddenly realizes he has been expertly trapped within the inescapable confines of a meticulously documented timeline. The air grew thick and heavy with anticipation as everyone waited for the bureaucrat's escape act. When Kash Patel finally managed to find his voice, it was a profound disappointment. Stripped of all previous bureaucratic authority, institutional bravado, and practiced arrogance, he weakly asserted to the committee that the highly suspicious, late-night phone call concerned a completely separate, entirely unidentified matter, wholly unrelated to the Epstein investigation. He offered no further details, no illuminating context, and absolutely no verifiable alibi, delivering just a hollow, desperately unconvincing denial. Senator Kennedy did not yell in triumph, nor did he express any degree of manufactured, theatrical outrage for the evening news broadcasts. Instead, he responded with a razor-sharp, devastating application of rural Louisiana logic that cut completely through the thick bureaucratic fog like a freshly sharpened scalpel. "Director," Kennedy drawled, his tone remarkably conversational but his eyes remaining fiercely locked onto his target. "If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it is probably not a chicken." With that singular, highly memorable, folksy idiom, Kennedy flawlessly laid bare the sheer, insulting absurdity of the massive coincidence that Director Patel was openly demanding the United States Senate to blindly swallow. Kennedy systematically outlined the profound, mathematical improbability of the situation. He highlighted the undeniable reality. Highly sensitive documents that dedicated career professionals had already thoroughly vetted and explicitly cleared for public release were suddenly universally reclassified and hidden away a mere 48 hours after the sitting director of the FBI held a highly unusual, late-night, 17-minute conversation with Donald Trump's personal defense attorneys on a personal device. The proximity defied innocent explanation. Kennedy leaned closer over his microphone, stared intensely into the eyes of the highest-ranking federal law enforcement officer in the nation, and asked a question that resonated like a thunderclap. "Do I look like I was born yesterday, Director?" Sensing the catastrophic, real-time collapse of his carefully cultivated public optics and the total evaporation of his professional credibility, Patel attempted a final, desperate, impassioned defense of his personal character. He stiffened his posture, pulling himself up in his chair, and stated with a heavy dose of manufactured indignation that he deeply resented the severe implication being made. He fiercely declared he would never dare to compromise the storied institutional integrity of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, nor violate his own moral compass for the sake of cheap political considerations or partisan favors. Kennedy's rebuttal to this theatrical, desperate display of personal offense was breathtakingly cold and surgical. He did not take the bait. He did not engage in a screaming match about honor or ethics. He simply, calmly clarified for the permanent, unalterable congressional record that he was absolutely not making a subjective implication, nor casting baseless aspersions upon the director's character. He stated, with chilling finality, that he was merely reciting a rigid, unbroken chronological sequence of heavily documented, undeniable fact. He was presenting a verified paper trail, leaving the American electorate and the historical record completely free to draw their own inescapable, deeply logical conclusions regarding the incredibly dark, terrifying underlying meaning of that specific sequence of events. Then, having successfully cornered his witness with a barrage of undeniable data points, Kennedy prepared to ask the singular, defining question of the entire oversight hearing. It was a masterfully crafted inquiry designed with mathematical precision to force the FBI director into an impossible, no-win corner from which there could be no bureaucratic escape. Are there documents currently in the Epstein files that directly name and implicate Donald Trump in criminal activity? Yes or no? Faced with this explosive inquiry, Patel instinctively retreated behind the ultimate, historically impenetrable shield of the American intelligence community. He stated rigidly that he could not, and absolutely would not, comment on the specific, highly sensitive contents of classified materials in an open, unclassified, public setting. It was the standard, rehearsed escape hatch utilized by intelligence officials for decades. However, Kennedy immediately and ruthlessly closed this final escape route. He clarified, with absolute linguistic precision, that he was absolutely not asking Director Patel to describe the sensitive contents of the files, nor was he asking him to reveal covert sources, clandestine methods, or ongoing investigative strategies. He was simply asking a foundational, binary question regarding the mere physical existence of such documents. Kennedy repeated the trap, closing the jaws tight. Do documents exist within the FBI's withheld Epstein files that implicate Donald Trump? Yes or no? Patel shifted incredibly uncomfortably in his large leather chair. He cast one final, desperate, searching glance over his shoulder toward his highly paid, completely silent legal counsel, who offered no lifeline. Turning back to the microphone, his voice tight with the realization of the damage he was about to inflict upon himself, Patel delivered his answer. Senator, I respectfully decline to answer that question in this forum. At that precise moment, Kennedy did not raise his voice in victory. He did not pound his fists upon the wooden desk to create a viral spectacle. He simply turned his body slightly away from the witness table and looked directly, piercingly, into the broadcast television cameras arrayed along the side wall of the grand chamber. He was no longer addressing the director of the FBI. He was directly addressing the American people and the annals of history. The director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation just explicitly refused to deny that evidence exists connecting Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein's criminal activities, Kennedy stated with chilling clarity. He could have easily said no. He did not. With that devastating, unforgettable final pronouncement, Senator Kennedy formally concluded his line of questioning. He had not relied on theatrical, scripted closing arguments. He had not relied on emotional appeals. He had relied exclusively, relentlessly, on a heavily documented timeline and successfully secured a stunning, on-the-record refusal to deny, permanently etching both of those monumental achievements into the official, indestructible congressional record. To truly understand the historic, earth-shattering gravity of this confrontation, we must analytically dissect the methodical, brick-by-brick construction of Kennedy's timeline. It is absolutely essential to recognize that this timeline is not built upon political hyperbole, internet conspiracy theories, or partisan speculation. It is constructed entirely upon undeniable arithmetic, verifiable dates, and official institutional records. Fact 1. The FBI currently hoards a massive, sprawling cache of roughly 2,300 highly sensitive documents directly related to the Jeffrey Epstein criminal enterprise. Director Patel explicitly confirmed this staggering volume under oath before the committee. Fact 2. Only a microscopic, almost insulting fraction of these files, a mere 90 documents, representing roughly 4% of the total archive, have actually been released to the public. This leaves a staggering, unacceptable 96% of the truth completely submerged in impenetrable darkness, hidden from the victims and the electorate. Fact 3. An internal, leaked FBI memorandum dated exactly February 8th conclusively and undeniably proves that 47 of these specific, withheld documents had already successfully navigated grueling legal reviews, intense privacy redaction protocols, and strict classification assessments by dedicated career DOJ attorneys and FBI special agents. They were officially, legally cleared for imminent public release. Fact 4. Immediately following Kash Patel's partisan appointment and installation as director, a top-down, sweeping administrative directive emanating directly from his front office abruptly and inexplicably reversed this clearance. The directive unilaterally redesignated those exact 47 documents as highly restricted law enforcement sensitive material, snatching them back from the public domain. Fact 5. Official telecommunications logs conclusively, permanently prove that at exactly 10:47 p.m. on the dark night of February 23rd, Director Patel utilized his own personal cell phone to engage in a 17-minute, off-the-books conversation with Kasowitz Benson Torres, the powerful law firm actively representing President Donald Trump. Fact 6. Exactly 48 hours later, on the morning of February 25th, the 47 previously cleared documents were officially, formally buried deep within the FBI's classified vaults. Fact 7. When explicitly, directly asked under the strict penalty of perjury, if anyone from Donald Trump's political or legal orbit requested this sudden burial of evidence, Patel completely avoided the question, deploying a philosophical dodge about his personal integrity rather than issuing a factual, straightforward denial of contact. Fact 8. When asked the most direct, explosive question imaginable whether concrete evidence physically exists within those hidden files implicating Donald Trump in criminal activity, Patel issued a flat, unequivocal, and legally terrifying refusal to answer. Senator Kennedy did not explicitly allege that a federal crime had been committed. He did not claim to possess absolute, smoking gun proof of direct, corrupt causation. He simply took these 8 concrete, heavily verified facts, arranged them in a flawless chronological order, and allowed their extreme, undeniably suspicious temporal proximity to generate an overwhelming, crushing burden of proof. When 2 highly abnormal, unprecedented events occur in such incredibly close, rapid succession, a late-night, back-channel, personal phone call to a potential investigative subject's private defense team, followed almost immediately by the aggressive suppression of highly sensitive documents that the aforementioned subject might desperately want, suppressed the heavy burden of explaining why this is merely a bizarre coincidence falls entirely, squarely on the shoulders of the individual who orchestrated both of those events. Director Patel's incredibly weak, flimsy explanation, the vague assertion that the midnight call concerned an unidentified separate matter, only birthed a multitude of vastly more disturbing, urgent questions. What specific, highly urgent matter necessitates the active, sitting director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation to spend 17 minutes on a personal cellular device with a high-profile politician's private defense attorneys late at night? Because Patel consciously and strategically chose to provide absolutely zero substantive context for this bizarre communication, his stubborn silence effectively weaponized Senator Kennedy's timeline, transforming it instantly into the dominant, undeniable, and defining narrative of his tenure. This epic confrontation drastically transcends mere procedural disputes regarding governmental transparency or bureaucratic red tape. The Jeffrey Epstein files represent a fundamental, existential stress test of the American justice system as a whole. The American public is acutely, painfully aware that sprawling, detailed flight logs, horrifying, graphic witness testimonies, and complex, labyrinthine financial records detailing illicit offshore transactions involving the world's most powerful politicians, untouchable billionaires, and influential media titans currently exist somewhere within those 2,300 securely withheld documents. The central, burning question that Senator Kennedy posed strikes directly at the very heart of our democratic republic. Does the American justice system actively, aggressively, and corruptly protect the ultra-powerful elite fundamentally differently than it treats ordinary working-class citizens? When 47 highly sensitive documents are painstakingly, thoroughly vetted and cleared for public release by non-partisan, career law enforcement professionals, individuals whose entire professional existence revolves around delicately balancing the public's absolute right to transparency with vital national security interests, only to have a newly installed, politically appointed executive aggressively overrule their expert, seasoned judgment mere days after secretly consulting with a potential subject's legal team, it manufactures a highly toxic, radioactive appearance of deep-seated corruption that absolutely demands a comprehensive, immediate explanation. While this sequence of events may not currently constitute definitive, prosecutable proof of criminal wrongdoing in a federal court of law, in the vital, fragile arena of public trust, dark, sinister appearances that are actively allowed to go completely unexplained rapidly and violently rot the foundational integrity of our democratic institutions. Director Patel's stubborn, highly calculated refusal to simply answer the basic, binary question regarding the mere physical existence of Trump-related documents was a catastrophic, unforced political and legal error of truly monumental proportions. Answering the question did not require disclosing a single, solitary syllable of classified content. It did not necessitate the dangerous exposure of covert investigative methods, nor did it require the unmasking of highly sensitive human intelligence sources. If no such damning, implicating evidence existed within the vaults, Patel could have easily, swiftly, and definitively said so, instantly extinguishing the raging controversy and clearing the former president's name. If the documents did exist, but legally failed to indicate actual, prosecutable criminal liability, he could have confidently and firmly stated that crucial legal caveat on the record. By aggressively opting for a flat, absolute refusal to answer, Patel birthed a massive, devastating, and entirely avoidable inference. It is the highly logical, completely unavoidable public inference that the terrifying unspoken answer is yes, but that speaking that radioactive truth aloud on the permanent congressional record would be politically, professionally, and legally unsurvivable for everyone involved. Senator Kennedy fully and expertly understood the complex psychological dynamics and the intense legal undercurrents of the hearing room. This deep comprehension is exactly why he did not waste his strictly allotted time aggressively badgering, shouting at, or berating the witness after the initial, damning refusal was issued. He simply, elegantly highlighted the refusal for the historical record, ensuring it could never be erased. This single, incredibly powerful moment of oversight will be relentlessly analyzed by legal scholars and aggressively weaponized by civil rights attorneys in future Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, litigation across the country. Plaintiffs and watchdog groups across the nation will excitedly utilize this exact, sworn transcript to forcefully, persuasively argue before federal judges that the FBI's ongoing, blanket classification decisions are heavily tainted by corrupt political self-preservation and elite protectionism, rather than being driven by legitimate, legally necessary law enforcement and national security needs. The 7-minute late-night telephone call stands alone as the undeniable, radioactive linchpin of this entire, sprawling scandal. While it is certainly true that FBI directors routinely, officially communicate with the Attorney General of the United States, or the White House counsel regarding highly complex matters of executive privilege or national security, maintaining back-channel, late-night, unmonitored phone calls on personal devices with a private citizen's legal defense team, especially regarding a highly explosive criminal investigation that may heavily implicate that exact citizen aggressively and unapologetically violates the strict, foundational, institutional boundaries specifically designed to prevent systemic corruption. Because Director Patel strategically, stubbornly failed to justify the innocuous nature of the call, the dark inference of a corrupt, highly illegal quid pro quo arrangement grows exponentially stronger with each passing day. Furthermore, the leaked internal memorandum, explicitly dated February 8th, is incredibly, deeply significant to the broader narrative, because it indicates a sweeping, categorical restriction of investigative files rather than a careful, nuanced, document-by-document legal review. This specific type of blanket, overarching reclassification, strongly and undeniably implies a politically motivated policy decision aimed directly at total, uncompromising suppression, rather than a genuine, targeted security concern. What could have possibly drastically changed in the global security environment between the exact time that career, expert professionals cleared those 47 documents and the time Director Patel unilaterally restricted them? Patel's vague, empty, bureaucratic citations of evolving methodology and updated risk assessments offer absolutely zero substantive, logical explanation. Therefore, the extreme, undeniable temporal proximity to the secret phone call with Donald Trump's defense lawyers rapidly becomes the most visible, the most obvious, and the only logical explanation for the sudden, unprecedented policy shift. What Senator John Kennedy executed during those brilliant, defining 7 minutes was nothing short of an absolute masterclass in true, effective, and surgical congressional oversight. In an era where legislative hearings are so frequently degraded into mere arenas for typical, screaming partisan theatrics, desperate attempts to secure viral cable news soundbites, and hollow political grandstanding, Kennedy chose an entirely different path. He entirely bypassed the predictable, manufactured outrage that so heavily infects modern American politics. Instead of raising his voice, he weaponized cold, hard documentation. He utilized undeniable internal federal memos and physical, verifiable phone logs to painstakingly build an unassailable chronological sequence of events. He did not ask for opinions. He presented undeniable facts, cornering his witness with a paper trail that simply could not be reasoned away by slick bureaucratic maneuvering or rehearsed talking points. The profound, historical significance of Senator John Kennedy being a staunch, deeply conservative Republican cannot possibly be overstated or minimized in this specific context. In today's hyper-polarized political environment, almost every congressional inquiry is instantly categorized and dismissed by political pundits through a strictly partisan lens. However, when a highly recognized, conservative Republican senator aggressively interrogates an FBI director who was directly appointed by his own political party and presents undeniable documentary evidence of potential top-level federal misconduct, the entire dynamic shifts. This highly unusual scenario completely shatters the protective illusion of a partisan witch hunt. It severely and fundamentally undercuts any defensive narrative that this line of questioning is merely bitter, opposition party obstructionism designed to score cheap political points. Instead, it clearly and powerfully signals to the voting public that the underlying evidence is so incredibly strong and the established timeline is so deeply troubling that it ethically compels members of the exact same political faction to forcefully demand truthful answers under oath. It demonstrates that the demand for transparency can triumph over blind party loyalty. As the situation stands today, following the dramatic conclusion of that hearing, the 47 specific documents in question remain heavily classified and locked securely away from the public eye. The vast remainder of the archive, totaling 2,254 documents, remains securely withheld deep within the federal vaults of the FBI. The American public, along with the countless victims, remains entirely blind to an astounding 96% of the truth regarding the sprawling, international Epstein criminal network. We are left looking at a mere shadow of the true picture. But what fundamentally and irreversibly changed on the fateful afternoon of February 13th is that the dark, unilateral, executive decision to keep those crucial files perpetually hidden from the victims is no longer going completely unquestioned. Senator Kennedy bravely placed into the permanent, indestructible congressional record a deeply disturbing, highly specific timeline. This timeline explicitly and undeniably shows a late-night phone call to a former president's personal defense lawyers, followed by an abrupt, sweeping reclassification of previously cleared evidence just 48 hours later, culminating in a stunning refusal by the sitting FBI director to categorically deny that Trump-related criminal evidence exists within those hidden files. That permanent legislative record is not a fleeting news cycle, it is an eternal document. It will be aggressively referenced every single time Kash Patel is forced to testify under oath in the future about his opaque, highly questionable decision-making processes. It instantly becomes highly potent, legally binding ammunition for tenacious investigative journalists seeking to expose the truth, for subsequent congressional oversight committees issuing legally binding subpoenas, and for relentless FOIA plaintiffs who are demanding ultimate accountability in federal court. Circumstantial evidence is frequently misunderstood as weak, but in reality, it can be overwhelmingly powerful. It is true that circumstantial evidence is not direct, smoking gun proof like a videotaped confession. However, when multiple, highly unusual, and highly specific circumstances begin to perfectly align in a clear, unbroken, chronological pattern, they create an overwhelming, undeniable inference that violently demands a logical explanation. Consider the 5 pillars Kennedy established. A 7-minute late-night phone call between the FBI director and a subject's lawyers is the first highly suspicious circumstance. An abrupt, sweeping reclassification of sensitive documents a mere 2 days later is a second, deeply troubling circumstance. The fact that those specific documents had already been thoroughly vetted and explicitly cleared for public release by career law enforcement professionals is a third, aggravating circumstance. A flat refusal under oath to deny that a subject explicitly asked for the burial of those exact files is a fourth circumstance. And finally, a flat refusal under oath to deny that implicating documents even exist within the vault is a fifth, devastating circumstance. Any one of these 5 singular events might theoretically be explained away in isolation as a bizarre coincidence, but all 5 occurring closely together, in that exact sequence, create an undeniable, deeply troubling pattern of behavior that Director Kash Patel was utterly incapable of defending. The official, sworn hearing transcript flawlessly and eternally preserves every single pointed, surgical question Senator Kennedy asked, and it equally preserves every single evasive, uncomfortable non-answer Director Patel provided. The damning physical phone log is no longer just a piece of paper. It is now a permanent fixture of American political history. The chronological timeline is officially documented for the ages, immune to the shifting winds of political spin. This is the true, lasting, and profound power of highly effective congressional oversight. It carefully creates a rigorously documented, legally sound record that severely limits future bureaucratic evasion. It provides a rock-solid, unshakable foundation for continued, relentless accountability efforts that will stretch out for years to come. We must never lose sight of the human element at the center of this massive institutional failure. The countless survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's horrific, systemic crimes deeply and fundamentally deserve to know exactly what is hiding in those federal files. Furthermore, the American public deserves to know definitively whether deeply powerful people are being actively and illegally protected by opaque, politically motivated classification decisions made in the shadows. When world-altering, historically significant information is abruptly buried exactly 2 days after the director of the FBI calls the personal lawyers of someone who might be heavily implicated, the public has an absolute, undeniable right to loudly ask why. Senator Kennedy bravely asked why. Kash Patel flatly refused to answer. The hearing eventually ended, but the devastating chronological timeline permanently remains etched in stone. February 23rd, a highly unusual, late-night, 7-minute call. February 25th, exactly 47 previously cleared, highly sensitive documents are abruptly reclassified and hidden from public view. Both of these staggering events are fully documented. Both of these events are entirely undisputed by the FBI. When future historians, legal scholars, and investigative reporters look back to carefully examine exactly how the explosive Epstein files were handled by the government, they will inevitably reference this exact hearing. They will clearly see the undeniable timeline, and they will easily draw their own logical, profoundly damning conclusions. The files currently remain hidden in the dark, but relentless, meticulous documentation is always the mandatory, critical first step toward eventual, total disclosure. Senator Kennedy made absolutely sure those timelines are permanently preserved. Director Patel made absolutely sure his own devastating, cowardly non-answers are permanently preserved right alongside them. Together, they tell a chilling story that is, without a doubt, far from over.